Bible searching for its dominant themes. And counted 87 times when Jesus said, follow me. Well, you know that got me thinking, maybe that's the bottom line of what Christian means. Cause that follow Jesus is deeper than I believe. Because it don't take much to mentally agree with a set of beliefs written down in some creed. Now don't get me wrong, we need to know what we believe, but lately I've been wondering, am I following Jesus or just believing in Christ? Cause I can believe and not change a thing, but following will change my whole life. He never said, come acknowledge my existence, or believe in me, I'm the second person of the Trinity. But 87 times he said, follow me. If I'm a follower of Jesus, why am I such a good life insurance risk? Why, when I do my giving, do I still keep so much when so much hunger exists? If I follow Jesus, why do I have so many friends among the affluent, so few among the poor? And if I follow Jesus, why do missiles and guns make me feel more secure? And it don't take much to mentally assent to a statement of faith we can confirm and forget. But following will change our lifestyle if we get it. And more I'm wondering, am I following Jesus? Just believing in Christ. Cause I can believe and not change a thing. But following it cost me my life. He never said, come acknowledge my existence, or believe in me, I'm the second person of the Trinity. But 87 times he said, come follow me. Yes, we need to know what we believe, to follow the Jesus who's real. Oh, God save us from the Christ we created in our image. You know what I mean? The Jesus who's his left wing or right wing is we. The one who baptizes our cherished ideologies, the one who always seems to favor our side against some enemy. I don't mean to sound self-righteous. God knows I've got more questions than answers to proclaim. But it's been over 20 years now since Jesus called my name. So forgive me if I'm mistaken. There's something wrong with a lot of churches in America these days, and I think the Spirit's trying to tell us that there's a question that the churches need to raise. Are we following Jesus, just believing in Christ? We believe and not change a thing. Following will change our whole life. He never said, come acknowledge my existence, or believe in me, I'm your first class ticket to eternity. And 87 times he said, follow me, follow me, follow me, follow me,
Good morning, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that music to begin our time together from Brian Sergio. And I wanted to play that because it's going to tie into our theme for the day, and we'll talk more about that later. But welcome, everyone, for being here, and for those of you that are watching from your computers at home. If you are not familiar with us, you can visit our website, ufcucc.org. Or if you have questions, drop us an email, ufcucc@gmail.com. My name is Sharon Olson. I'm a lay leader here at United Faith, and we're going to begin our worship today. So if you want to stand, I want to start by passing the peace, and we will do that with sign language. So please follow with me. Peace be with you and also with you. Thank you. You can be seated. I want to start with a verse from Proverbs today, from chapter 22, verses 1 to 2. A sterling reputation is better than striking it rich. A gracious spirit is better than money in the bank. The rich and the poor shake hands as equals. God made them both. At this time, I want to start with prayers. Does anyone have prayer concerns or joys they want to share this morning? I have a joy. Yesterday we were at a wedding for my nephew James. James and Joanna got married yesterday, and that was a good family celebration. Anything else anybody have to share? Lisa.
I got to visit my aunt. Well, I saw my cousins, and then I'm gonna see the football game.
Okay.
Are those joys or concerns?
Both.
Both.
Hopefully mostly joys.
Yeah.
We'll see with the football game. You never know. Well, thank you. Anybody else?
I just ask for some prayers for David as he's at college, that he gets a little more comfortable.
Good. Okay. Anything else?
Well, let's remember our friends Ned and Donna and her husband Greg, as they have some health issues they're still dealing with.
Okay. All right, we'll keep them. All right, well, let's join in prayer this morning. Most loving God, we thank you for this day, for the joy of coming together to praise your holy name. We thank you for all that you do for us, but we are mindful there are many tragedies in our world today. Fires, hurricanes, pandemic, war. Be with all those affected, those fighting the fires, first responders, those helping with cleanup, medical staff who are weary fighting the COVID virus that lingers, for those that have lost loved ones, for those who have lost their homes. And we pray that our leaders can have the wisdom, give them the wisdom to lead us in a path forward. Walk with them, comfort them, remind them of your love for them. We thank you for joyful times, for weddings, for times with family. Please be with David as he begins a new phase of his life at college. And we also lift up to you those that are having medical concerns, Ned, Donna, and Greg. Be with them as well. Be with their healthcare providers. Give them some wisdom to lead them through this journey. And we pray all of these things in Christ's name. Amen. So this morning I'm going to read a passage from James, chapter 2, verses 1 to 10, 14 to 17. And I'm going to read these from the Message this morning. My dear friends, don't let public opinion influence how you live your glorious Christ-originated faith. If a man enters your church wearing an expensive suit and a street person wearing rags comes in right after him, and you say to the man in the suit, "Sit here, sir. This is the best seat in the house," and either ignore the straight person or say, "Better sit here in the back row." Haven't you segregated God's children and proved that you are judges who can't be trusted? Listen, dear friends. Isn't it clear by now that God operates quite differently? He chose the worlds down and out as the kingdom's first citizens with full rights and privileges. This kingdom is promised to anyone who loves God. And here you are abusing these same citizens. Isn't it the high and mighty who exploit you, who use the... So in James' letter, he ends chapter 1 with this verse. Real religion, the kind that passes muster before God the Father, is this. Reach out to the homeless and loveless in their plight, and guard against corruption from the godless world. Many of us probably think, I got this. I'm working towards helping others. So James, in the next chapter, gives us a test. So this from chapter 2. If a man enters your church wearing an expensive suit and a street person wearing rags comes in right after him, and you say to the man in the suit, "Sit here, sir. This is the best seat in the house," and either ignore the street person or say, "Better sit here in the back seat," haven't you segregated God's children and proved that you are judges who can't be trusted? If we're honest, we have to squirm a little at this scenario. Of course, we've all done this. We've all shown partiality to one over another. Maybe it's a particular ethnicity, someone in a suit, someone in shorts, a queer person, someone with a tattoo and piercings, someone with long greasy hair, someone morbidly obese. We judge people by how they appear. We hope we're overcoming it. We hope we're countering it. We hope we're better than that. But the truth is, society has drilled it to us to value people on outward appearances more than essential being. In James's test case, he seems to be talking about the poor, at least to the working class. A little later on, he says, "Isn't the high and mighty who exploit you?" He is making a distinction between those folks out there who are rich and those who are poor. So could this be a hospitality issue? Who are you happier to see come through your door? The ones who can help you to pay the bills, or anyone? This means in part that this comes back to who are you really looking out for? Are you really interested in yourselves and those who can help you realize your vision for the church? Or are you interested in seeing all the people? Is it about the inward focus of the church or the outward mission of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world? The world, not just the church. James then shifts focus. In verse 14, he expresses what he sees as the core of the faith. This verse says, "Dear friends, do you think you'll get anywhere in this if you learn all the right words but never do anything?" This is the struggle that has bedeviled the church from the beginning. Faith and works. We have too often turned this into a dichotomy or even a struggle. Faith versus works. James wants nothing to do with such a false divide. With your acts, we see what you really believe. You can say you believe all kinds of things, but your life will bear witness to your belief, says James. For James, then, at the heart of believing is how we view and treat others. Do we somehow see some as more worthy of grace than others? Do we act as though there are those among us who deserve a higher place, more attention, more service than others? That's what he is wrestling with in this text. Making distinctions, giving preferential treatment to one over another, Key for James and the early church was the distinction between rich and poor. That was, in his view, what was tearing the church apart. Certainly, we have not changed too much from the description he provides in this chapter. He also, in this text, gives the lie to the thoughts and prayers as being an adequate response to human need. Certainly, we need to be in prayer for those who are hurting. Certainly, we need to be mindful of those who are suffering. But to believe that this relieves us of a responsibility to act is not adequate to the gospel we claim to believe. This is what brings the charge of dead faith from James. It is a faith that doesn't act, doesn't live out core belief. It is faith, James would argue, that isn't faith. He isn't saying that we are saved by our works. That has always been the warning in the midst of this. It is why Martin Luther was afraid of this letter. Luther feared that people would read it as saying that do enough good works and you'll receive salvation. But that isn't James' argument. Instead, he is saying that true faith has to come out in words and in deeds. It isn't just about what resides in our heads, but what comes out through our hands. This section of James' letter could be summed up as being an admonishment to put our faith into action. Seems simple, right? But as with most things that matter, simple doesn't mean easy. So thank you for listening to all of that. So in the song that we heard at the beginning from Brian Sergio, he is quoting a scholar who studied the Bible and said 87 times Jesus said, "Follow me." So what does that mean to us? What does follow me mean to us? Is it about belief, or is it more than that?
I think it's much more than that. So it's all about, you can believe whatever you want, but without the actions to go with it and the outward actions that align with that, it doesn't support you and it doesn't support your community that you live in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think one of the other lines in that song references something to that Jesus never did say, you have to do this and you have to do this and you have to do this to follow me. He wasn't giving us specifics that we had to do. He said, follow me in the way of follow his teachings. And, Jesus didn't just say, well, if you do this, this, and this, A, B, and C, you're going to go to heaven. It was more than that. And unfortunately, I think even some of our fellow Christians forget that.
Is there maybe a false sense of what's most important? Is the end goal to get to heaven, or is the end goal to follow Jesus? Is there maybe a weighing of those two things, perhaps?
I don't know if people consciously weigh those two things. But I think that it makes a difference in their actions and what they do. When we think about it, one of the things that has always really, really bothered me a bit has been, you know, you're saved if you do these specific things, like, I don't know, John 3:16. And I know that there's some groups and some people that is literally their goal is to go out and save people. And it bothers me because how do you support that person? Whether they say those words or not, how is you having that conversation and specifically saving them or helping them, how are you continuing to support that relationship with God to show that God really does care? I don't know, it feels like many times we have it backwards, where I truly feel like actions supplement the belief, and it feels like the belief, a lot of people put the belief before the actions.
So kind of like that was a discussion in the early church from things I've read. You know, that you can be saved by faith alone. In other words, if you believe you're saved, you'll go to heaven. And there was other people that said, no, you're saved by your works, what you do. Doesn't matter. So that's been I think it's part of the church's, I guess, discussion for a long, long time, many centuries. But it's probably important to think about. I mean, do you think one is more important than the other?
Well, you could say, I have faith, look at me, I faithfully attend worship service every week.
Mm-hmm.
Profess my faith there, and so I should be good. But what about the other 6 days of the week? Does that mean I can go, because I attend worship service every week, every Sunday, does that mean the other 6 days I can go out and do whatever I feel like to whoever I feel like? Can I rob? Can I destroy? Can I ignore the poor in those other 6 days? But because I come back to worship on Sunday, I show my faith.
Well, I think it's interesting to note that Jesus acted on his faith, his belief system, if you will, even when it went against the laws in his day. He healed on the Sabbath, which of course had the Jewish leaders quite upset because that went against the Jewish law of the time. So he certainly didn't keep it to, well, I did my Sabbath on, you know, I celebrated the Sabbath and now I'm good. You know, he seemed to be following through on his works every day, any day.
It feels like works were more important than maybe not belief, but at least laws.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe a person is, I mean, you look back to when God first called Moses, for example, to lead those people. Moses resisted. He said, I'm slow of tongue, I don't speak well in public, I'm not a leader, whatever. But yet his actions proved more worthy of that. And that God chose him because of his actions, and Actually, what he did then is he said, well, bring your brother Aaron along, who speaks very well, and he'll be your mouthpiece, for example, so to speak. But you know, we might encounter a person who dedicates their life to helping the poor, to you know, taking care of the homeless, to you know, working in a food shelf and things like that. They're just not a very articulate person. But yet they dedicate their life to that whole work, which to me speaks volumes of, you know, what they're doing, even though they maybe can't articulate what their faith means to them.
Mhm. For me, I always look at that and I think, well, if you truly have faith and you read biblically the example that Jesus taught or showed us, I have a hard time understanding how you can have that faith and not then move to the works part of it. How can you then not help the poor? How can you not take to heart when Jesus said, love others as you love yourself? And how does that justify, how then can you have hate to others and exclude others? And I just don't see how you can really split those apart. Although it feels like some people do. And it is a struggle because, as I was talking about earlier, we all have biases. So when we see someone, we tend to run, and this is part of our what the world around us is telling us to do. We tend to judge people by the appearance, whether it's right or wrong, or may not even be consciously or unconsciously. An example of that for myself, and I'm ashamed to say this, when I took a bunch of kids some kids on a mission trip, and we get there, and it's in Minneapolis, and it's not in the best of neighborhoods, and there's this guy who to me looked homeless and whatnot, and he was trying to talk to us, and I was really leery. I didn't want to talk to him. I was like, I don't know. But then to find out later, yes, he was a man who had been homeless. He was also working with the kids, with the group that we were there to work with. He was, he came in and was working with the kids and this and that, and he was fine. But my initial reaction was, oh no, oh no, I don't think you're good. I don't think you're a good person. To be suspicious. And I think we do that. We do that to people a lot. If they come in with tattoos and piercings or long greasy hair, we kind of immediately jump to some conclusions that we maybe shouldn't. And how do we overcome that? How do we get past that? Does anybody have any ideas how we?
Well, I think one thing that we need to remember to do is yeah, you may have your initial reactions, but you need to hold those inside until you get to know those people better, to know their story. Because sometimes you have no idea what they've gone through. And I know that's a big issue in the racial equity work I've done, is that many white people, all those black people are lazy and they're no good and they don't want to work and things like that. And one of my first questions when I hear that type of comment is, how many people of color do you really know? And usually the answer is none. It's like, you need to try to get to know these people too, and it doesn't matter if it's a person of color or not. If there's something like your example of your homeless appearing person, you know, we need to not typically judge the book by the cover, and really get to know those people for what they really are, and you know, maybe they have health issues that prevent them from working, but we don't know that because they look healthy.
And what I try to be mindful of too is, you can't, if you only know one black person, they're not representative of every black person. And I hear people say this, and I try not to do this. We tend to do this, is we tend to say everybody of that ethnicity is the same. You know, like you said, all black people are lazy, or whatever it might be. And that's not fair, because just like anyone that's white and European descent, we're not all the same. Yes, you have some that are, you have poor, you have rich, you have everything in between. You have good people, you might have people that are lazy. And that's not a function of any ethnicity. That's just how it is with any group. And I try to really hard not to lump people together and say, oh, they're all this or they're all Y, because I know within that group, they're not. There are differences. So,
one of the things that I know, like, I struggle with is, I have a really good friends, this family that we've known for well over 30 years, all my life, and recently, one of the kids, stepkids in the family or whatever, has died. And there isn't a whole lot of information that's being put out, at least on social media or anything else, just that he made a transition. And I know that I'm making the assumption, because there isn't a clear indication anywhere, that this young man, committed suicide. And I think that I'm making that assumption, but I don't know that. And I think we need to be really careful about some of those things, because we do this all the time, whether we know or not. Like, I don't know this person really well at all. I've actually probably met them. I just know some of the family that's pretty close to me. I don't know this person. But, and even if it is, that's the case, a lot of times I've heard judgments made about that. And, well, that person's going to hell or something along those lines because of that. And I'm like, we have to be really careful, because we don't know that. That's in God's court. That's in whatever is going on. And we have no idea what could have been happening in this person's life that spiraled it to that point. We don't know what the medical conditions are. We don't know where they were and how much of life they might have been experiencing that was just tragic. Or maybe there was something else that the family just doesn't want to be the public reason for this person's passing, and they're keeping it internal to themselves because they want the good that this person represented. And all the good that he did in particular. I mean, he was, I guess, would walk through the streets of Los Angeles and hand out bags of lunch to the homeless people. I mean, that was just one of the things that they put out there, that his heart was just always out there. And I think sometimes we fail to realize that that also has an emotional toll. I don't know what that did, and how that could have impacted who he is. And some of us can shield our emotions much better than others. So I think that we do, especially in our world of social media, tend much more now than I think that we ever did, even in the past 20 years. I mean, you know, before social media, I think we still made a lot of assumptions, but I think it's even far, far worse now than it was then.
Yeah, and you know, I think part of it is on social media there you can control what's put out there. So you can get that perfect family picture because you spent an hour hurting everybody and getting that perfect picture. But is that a reflection of reality? You know, so yeah, for most people, they're putting out on the social media the very positive, the very happy moments. You get a very one-dimensional view from social media. I mean,
or they're putting their beliefs out there, and somebody that has an alternate belief, we make that assumption that they're not somebody you want to associate with because it is an alternate belief that that somebody might have from you. Like, okay, they completely support this political candidate and I don't, so
yep.
You know, and I think that that's actually led to a lot less conversations with people that we already know have a different viewpoint than we do.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way. I have a lot of family that believe very differently than I do. And yeah, if I saw them saw them on social media, I probably wouldn't want to know them either. But they're family, so I already know them.
Well, like Ash said, you know, we tend to want to judge a person maybe on one issue, and whether that issue is something like voting rights or abortion or political stand or whatever, and we fail to get to know the person. We fail to realize that, okay, we disagree on issue A, but on issue B, C, D, and E, we're right together with that. You know, we tend to want to judge people on one particular issue, and by not getting to know them, by not knowing that backstory, a lot of times we fail to find people that we really find you can associate with. And you know, yeah, we agree to disagree on a particular issue, and that's fine. But you know, you can agree and have conversation about so many other things once you get to know that person.
I mean, even on like the abortion rights one, that's really prominent. Like, I know certain parts of my family are on one side or the other, but I also know the reasons why. Like, I mean, I have family and they are completely against abortion, but I also understand that the reason that they have such a strong feeling about that is because they were put in a position where they had to make that decision. And I've never been in that position. I don't know. I have what I think I would do, but I've never been there. So for me to say that, no, they shouldn't have that view, no, I can't say that. They've experienced it. I have not.
Yep.
So, and I think that we failed to recognize that so many times.
Mhm. Well, that kind of leads to another question I had is, you know, in the first part of the passage, he's focusing on, you know, rich versus poor and how you treat each other. So that was his focus, and apparently that was a very big distinction in James's time. But what are the distinctions that divide the church today? What do you think the things are? Probably abortion is one. But what are some other distinctions that tend to divide the church in our time?
Well, one of them is a conversation that you and I had yesterday in the car on the way home from this wedding, was that some religions discriminate against who is welcome at their communion table.
It was a Catholic wedding.
I wasn't going to say that.
Oh, okay.
But there are others. There are
Yeah.
other denominations that if you are not a member of that congregation or a member of that, even that denomination, you're not welcome at the table.
Mhm.
I mean, obviously that's not the case here and in many other churches, but some of them do.
There's still some, yeah. LGBTQ.
Yep.
There are churches where those persons are not welcome unless they're there to change. But they're not accepted as they are.
There's also a lot of churches where I think people don't feel welcome to have a different viewpoint than the church. So, you know, at least many times I feel like the conversation is the conversation about what the church believes instead of what people, an individual person within the church believes. And well, and I feel like the whole goal is to share the belief. And if you don't share that belief, you're an outsider. And I don't, you know, some churches have found really good ways to be welcoming and really supportive and show that that community, whether you believe or not. But other churches, I think, are very prescriptive about it, that you have to X, Y, Z. And I think they're taking God out of it at that point. What makes you and your church think that Jesus really meant this or God means this? Every person has their own belief system and their own experiences, and we don't value that enough.
Mhm.
And I find that really ironic, particularly in this country, being that many of the first white settlers to this country came here because they didn't agree with how the church in their native country was trying to tell them what to believe and how to believe it. And so now they're trying to me it seems they're trying to do the same thing.
I suppose it makes life easier for the church. everybody's believing in the same way, the same things, the uniformity.
It was really interesting. One time I went to well, I've been to many Jewish services.
Mhm.
And the biggest difference between the two of them is that usually the person, the cantor, or who's ever leading, the rabbi that's leading service, they'll come out and they will talk and they'll read some stuff and just give you not any sort of perspective, just things to think about. Like, it's usually with a sermon or whatever, there's usually a point and you can get a really distinct, it's much more vague there, where it's just like, here's a poem, or here's something from the Bible and somebody wrote a poem, or something along those lines, where your goal is for that to spark interest and discussion and communication. It's not to communicate a specific viewpoint.
Just to get you thinking kind of thing.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Well, that's kind of what I was trying to do this morning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Agree or disagree?
Well, and it's really interesting. There's a book, and some of you know one of my favorite authors is Barbara Brown Taylor. She taught, I don't know that she still does, she taught in college comparative religions course at a college out on the East Coast, and then wrote a book about it. And she titled the book Holy Envy, because what she did as part of this class is she took her students to different religious worship services. They went to a Jewish synagogue, they went to a Muslim mosque, they went to an Orthodox church. And the reason she titled her book Holy Envy is because in experiencing that for herself, as well as these students, she found that those other religions were much more receptive of having somebody there from in this case, Christian religion, in a Jewish synagogue, for example, and doing exactly what you talked about, where they maybe explain some things, or, and then afterwards were willing to talk about their religious beliefs and their worship services and things like that. And she was essentially jealous because we as Christians are not that open to talking with others about their different religions. So it was a really interesting perspective from a Christian minister to experience that firsthand.
Okay, so I have a final question. So when James was talking about, the rich versus the poor and who are you focused, what are you really focused on? It kind of touched on, so are we focused on inward? Are we focused on welcoming those that can help our church bring in, or is our focus outward into the world? Which focus is maybe, where do we want to be on that spectrum, or what do we think is important there?
Outward is definitely, I think it's better for the church to be focused outward and for us to be focused outward. But I also think that, because I think focusing inward, I think we drain ourselves, whereas focusing outward, or at least for me, I tend to get more energy from that.
Mhm. To me, it feels like that's following Jesus is to be more outward as well. You know, biblically, Jesus reached beyond his own Jewish people. So it feels to me like Jesus himself was more outward focused. He didn't seem to be worried about bolstering up the Jewish religion. He just had love for all people. Is what I take from it. So if we're to follow Jesus, it seems like that's where our focus should be, is for all people. So more of an outward. Any other thoughts? Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today, and it's been a good discussion, and I hope everyone has a good week. Thank you.